Hello, dear friends. A few days back, say 2 or 3 days back, I had recorded a lecture on Government of India Act 1935 and discussed its salient features. Today, I'll be discussing its limitations. In fact, insofar as Indian context was concerned, it had serious limitations. Though the act was passed to pacify the irate Indian nationals, and it was well in keeping with the Nehru report and other Lothian report and some other reports and Golmez, that is roundtable conferences that happened back in London. But in fact, the English willy-nilly brought it out, but finally they brought in this act their own design to actually put to naught every attempts made by the Indian nationals. That's why the act came to be heavily criticized from all quarters except from the Muslim League. And in fact, the Muslim League was not very much critical of it, as by that time Muslim League had not pressed for seriously pressed for the separation of the country, that is pressed for the demand for a separate homeland for the Muslims. That's why the Muslim League did not vocally criticize it, but the Congress came out with full mouth to criticize it. So we would be looking at the limitations from the perspective of the civil services examination. Now look at the limitation. The first one, undesirable safeguards. In fact, it simply means that the Governor General, also called Viceroy, had a special responsibility that he could easily brush aside or override the decisions of the Council of Ministers when it came to safeguarding the interest of the British Crown and the British Empire. So he had a special responsibility, individual judgment power, power of individual judgment, and discretionary power. In fact, his safeguard power, that is called overriding power or special responsibility power, in fact, was to simply safeguard the interest of the British Empire. It was meant to safeguard the interest of the British Crown. So safeguard measures consisted of three aspects, or three, you can say, phraseologies. One is special responsibility, another overriding power, and further another individual judgment or discretionary power. So insofar as the first one is concerned, that related to the safeguarding of the interest of the British Empire or the British Crown, or both. And the second one, overriding power, when it came to safeguarding the interest of the English Raj in India, he could easily override the decisions of the Council of Ministers. And when it came to approving the bill to be passed by the British provinces, or you can say the federating units of under the new act, that is Act of Government of India Act 1935. So he could use his discretionary or individual power judgment or individual decision making power to accept it or reject it. So by such a way, such safeguards, in fact, not only did more harm than good to the Indian interest or their aspirations, but it also further prolonged the British Raj in India. So first point is undesirable safeguards. The second one relates to reservation. In fact, in order to create reactionary forces or reactionary elements in the Indian system or in India, the British attempted to extend the reservation when their attempt to divide the Indian society by granting reservation to the Harijans failed. They attempted to extend it by further incorporating or including into their machinations certain other communities, for example, Anglo-Indians. And now the benefit of reservation are called the separate electorate, carved out on the basis of, or the constituencies carved out on the basis of caste and community, extended to Anglo-Indians, European Christians, Sikhs, Muslims, and Zamindars. In fact, Muslims and Jamidars were given this one in 1909. For the first time, separate electorate was in fact introduced in 1909 under the Indian Council Act. Six were included into this fold, and Christians in 1919 Government of India Act, and later Anglo-Indians and all European Christians were included. So this further supposed, or it is served to divide the Indian society, to weaken the national movement. So this was the second limitation. Third, relate to franchise. Only 14% of all the Indian population were eligible to cast their vote. The qualifications for franchise or to become a voter was very tough. Someone who could have say a certain amount of land in his name or at his disposal, and could be paying income tax or land revenues, etc. Only they were eligible to cast their franchise or to cast their vote. It was another serious restriction, rather only a phantom, or you can say facade of autonomy that they supposed to grant or implement at the provincial level. Now look at the next one, unparliamentary practices to be introduced. Contrary to all known parliamentary traditions, elections to the upper house were to be held directly, and elections to the lower house were to be held indirectly. In other words, the elections to constitute the Council of Ministers was supposed to be direct, and elections or election to constitute the lower house was supposed to be indirect. So whereas today, what is the condition today? The elections to the Lok Sabha are held directly, that people directly elect their representatives from the Lok Sabha constituencies or Lok Sabha constituencies, popular constituencies, and those elected to the state provinces or state assemblies, state assemblies or provincial assemblies, they in fact elect the members of the Rajya Sabha. So today, the members of the Rajya Sabha are elected indirectly, whereas then they were to be directly elected, and their tenure was to be for 9 years. Today it is 6 years. Means every third person or third strength of the upper house was to retire every 3 years, so that in 9 years there was to be a complete renewal. Today it happens in 6 years. So it was unparliamentary practices that they attempted to bring in. Look at the next one. Provincial autonomy was a farce. Though for the first time they introduced provincial autonomy. In other words, provinces got the subjects as their own. 59 subjects were kept under the union list, 56 under the state list, and 39 say later reduced to 37 under the concurrent list. Today, say there are 100 subjects in the union list, 61 subjects in the state list, and 53 subjects in the concurrent list. But then it was say very less one. But whatever be the case, provincial autonomy was a farce. Means it was only say a gimmick. In other words, provincial governors were not to exercise, were not to do anything without seeking the consent from the Governor General, and the popularly elected ministers or the Council of Ministers could be dismissed at the behest of the Governor General by the provincial governors. Moreover, provincial governors, in the like manner as the Governor General also enjoyed the power as mentioned above, that is overriding power, individual judgment power, and special responsibility power. So provincial autonomy, though it was said that the the elected ministers were now to be in full charge of the things, but by and large the ICS officers remained under the control of the provincial governors, and provincial governors were subjected to directions coming from the top, that is from the office of the Governor General or the Viceroy. And provincial governors were authorized or empowered to dismiss the Council of Ministers in their own discretion. It happened even into very much our post-independence period. until 1993, when in 1993-94 Mumbai case came out and the Supreme Court put a break on this tendency. So the provincial autonomy was a farce, as I discussed it. Now look at another limitation. Undue importance was given to the princely states. Though princely states, a smaller and larger one, together on average consisted or accounted for hardly 30% of the total populace, but they were given undue importance in both houses of the central legislature or the federal legislature, you can say, up to 40%. So undue importance was given to them to keep them happy and to say, in fact, encourage them to remain indifferent to the national movement or to act as reactionary force siding with the British regime. Now look at another one. Diarchy was proposed to be planted at the center, as I had already discussed. However, in practice, it did not happen. Diarchy never took place at the center, though it was removed from the provinces, as I had already discussed. It was in fact implemented in the provinces under the Government of India Act 1919, and later it was removed after Simon Commission criticized it, and but was proposed to be implemented at the center. However, for providential sake, it did not happen, and the diarchy never came at the center. Limitation of the proposed federal code. In fact, today, if the Supreme Court pronounces some judgment or gives some ruling, there is no other court before which an appeal could lie. But then it was proposed that even against the decision of the federal court, in fact, federal court is considered the predecessor of the Supreme Court of today that we witness, that we have. So federal, even against the decision of the federal court, one could go to the Privy Council sitting in London. In other word, in fact, there was a system of appeal lying before the Privy Council against the decision of the federal court. So it put a limitation on the federal court since there were no fundamental rights. Hence, the federal court could not justify or review the government decisions in the light of the fundamental rights, and hence the federal court was its power was severely restricted at several fronts. Now look at another one. Though Burma and Aden were proposed to be separated from the from the All India Federation and kept as a separate identity, that is, Burma was to be made a separate province under the overall British supervision, and Aden was to be a crown territory. It lay as an island near, close to, you can say, the Gulf of Persian Gulf. In fact, the Gulf of Aden, as it was called, it is close to the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf. So, if Burma was separated, Aden was separated. What happened? That those who were trying to put pressure on the British Empire from Burma, they in fact got weakened. Still, Subhash Chandra Bose in 1943 declared India first independence day for India from Burma, from Rangoon. So what I mean to say, it was done to in fact curtail or trim the feathers of the Indian nationalists who were working from the soil of Burma and Aden to put pressure on the British. So it was a clear ploy on their hands. Though they did it in the name of mal governance, that Burma and Aden needed to be separated simply to do good administration. But in fact, the motive was different. Now look at another one. RBI, in fact, continued to work for Burma until 1948, and thereafter it stopped working for Burma, and it also continued to work for Aden. So how could, in fact, under the Government of India Act 1935, RBI Act 1934 was justified, and RBI was to act as the federal bank for the union, for the proposed federation, also for the British provinces. But despite the fact that Burma and Aden were separated, but RBI was to look after us, to continue looking after their monetary needs. So it was a dichotomy, it was a contrast that the British brought in in the Government of India Act 1935. Now look at the last point. Dominance of Viceroy over entire British authority with residuary powers. Say, you know, residuary powers means those subjects which did not find any mention in the union list, in the state list, or in the concurrent list. They in fact remain vested either in the parliament or in the provinces, or in the you can say union, under the union government, or under the federating units. But say, contrary to all these traditions, residuary powers were to be vested in the viceroy. So it was in fact another one that went contrary to the parliamentary tradition or to the so-called All India Federation. So these are some of the limitations which I have discussed. I had already discussed the salient features, and say after a few days, say 1, 2, or 3 days, say we would be discussing what we have in fact inherited from the Government of India Act 1935, and which provisions find mention in the Government of India Act in our constitution. Say after finishing this one, look at another point. What Pandit Nehru described, the Government of India Act, he described it as charter of slavery, simply because the English attempted to enslave Indians under the garb of bringing out progressive, as you can say, act or legislative instrument. So that's why he called it charter of slavery, and further commented and compared it with a machine which had all the brakes but with no engine. In other words, it could not move, and before it could move, there could be put several brakes on it. So Pandit Nehru described it this way, and it is also a part of today's lecture. So look at, though it is not a point of limitation, but in fact it constitutes the part of today's lecture. So I was telling that we would be soon coming and discussing what we have inherited from the Government of India Act 1935 and what is found in our current constitution.